As you may have seen, the newest SSR character Dorothy is out right now, featured on the current rate up banner. And so in today's video, what I'm going to be doing is reviewing this character, talking about how good she is, and how she compares to the other characters that we have right now. I will also be telling you guys everything you need to know about her kit, so that you can maximize her value in your teams. Before we begin, I would really appreciate it if you could drop a like and subscribe, because I really put in a lot of effort in making these videos. So leaving a like will help get more eyes on this video. I will also be dropping a bunch of other guide videos like this very soon, so you don't want to miss out on that. With that being said, let me not waste any more of your time and let's jump right in. Starting things off, it's only right that we go over her skills to actually know what she does. Essentially, Dorothy is a burst 1 support character that mainly focuses on giving your team more damage and shortening their cooldowns. How this works is that she has a burst ability that places a mark on one of your enemies. This mark will accumulate a certain amount of damage within 10 seconds based on Dorothy's attack. You will be able to see the amount of damage underneath the mark on the target, and you should also be able to see how many targets the damage is being distributed to. So let's say that her burst has a 1 million damage cap, and then you have 5 enemies present. The 5 enemies will each take 200,000 damage. This also works on a single target, so in the same scenario, instead of the damage being spread out, it will only do 1 million damage to one enemy. This ability is really good, not only because it can deal a ton of damage in the right scenario, but also because you can manually place the mark on whichever enemy that you want. This is important because you would always want to place the mark on the target with the most HP. You have 10 whole seconds to accumulate damage, but if the marked enemy dies too early, however much damage you dealt up to that point will be the explosion damage from her burst. So if that happens, you won't be able to reach the maximum damage cap, making her ability do less damage overall. Additionally, this also has a manifestation effect that decreases the cooldown of her skill 2 from 20 seconds down to only 2 seconds. And her skill 2 basically deals an okay amount of damage, normally every 20 seconds. But do keep in mind that her skill 2 damage is also spread out between your enemies, similar to the explosion from Dorothy's burst. Moving on to her skill 1. This basically is a passive skill that activates whenever Dorothy fires her last bullet. It simply reduces your team's burst cooldowns, and at the same time, if Dorothy has the manifestation passive from her burst, this will also increase your team's damage dealt to the enemy parts, lasting for 5 seconds. Now that we have gone over her skills, I also want to quickly mention some of the issues that you may have. Yes, Dorothy is a really good unit for what she does, but she also comes with a few problems. As we have mentioned previously, Dorothy needs to use her burst, preferably on a target with a ton of HP. And if you actually use her in things like the campaign, simulation room, or basically any stage that has multiple waves of enemies, you will notice that you will often be forced to mark the enemies with the lower HP. So even though her burst has a high damage scaling, sometimes you will still be doing small damage when the marked enemy dies early. During my early analysis on Dorothy, I predicted that this is going to be an issue, so I was not surprised when I noticed it. Another problem that you will encounter is the timing of the explosion from her burst. The same thing with the first one, this will only happen in a stage with multiple waves of enemies. There will be some cases where the burst explosion will pop while there are no enemies on the stage, so in that unfortunate scenario, you won't be hitting a single enemy. Now that we have covered the downsides of her kit, where does Dorothy actually shine the most? As we have just talked about in the previous section, she is not that good in stages with high enemy density, but there is actually an exemption. If you are pushing stages that are way beyond your combat power, then Dorothy will actually perform better. Because in that case, your enemies are more likely to have more HP, so it's also more likely for you to actually hit the maximum damage cap on her burst. Additionally, Dorothy will also be really good for single target stages. Not only because she can deal one big damage using her burst, but also because her skill 1 has a second effect that will make it easier for your team to take out boss parts if you need to. And of course, she will be the best burst 1 option for the Pilgrim Tower, simply because the only other option we have is Rapunzel, and she has a 60-second burst cooldown. With that said, you can always run the two of them at the same time. As for PvP, I actually tried to do some testing, but there seems to be a bug where you get stuck in the loading screen whenever Dorothy is in your team. So unfortunately, I was not able to test her out for PvP. Moving on, let's talk about her team compositions. Dorothy is generally a very flexible unit simply because she is a burst 1 character with a 20-second cooldown burst, and she also uses an assault rifle, which is the most flexible weapon in the game. But with that said, there's a few things that you need to consider when building your teams. For one, Dorothy is purely an offense-oriented support. Sometimes it even feels wrong calling her a support because of how much damage she can do. But I'm bringing this up because if you do decide to use her in your team, you will most likely have to run a healer, a really good shielder, or tank unit. This means that you will have slightly less flexibility for your teams compared to when you are using Litter, who is a support that basically covers everything. One character that I know that has special synergy with Dorothy is Snow White. The reason being is if Dorothy applies a mark on a low HP target, Snow White can hit the target with her burst and it's almost guaranteed that you will hit the maximum damage cap. Of course, that depends on how much investment Snow White has relative to Dorothy, but for most cases, she will be able to hit the maximum damage cap on Dorothy's burst. Moving on, let's talk about Dorothy's gear. First and foremost, you would want to have the Resilience Cube on Dorothy. This will give you better reload speed so that you can hit your last bullet more often, activating the cooldown reduction from her skill 1. Now let's talk about endgame equipment and what stats you should be looking for. As of making this video, there is actually a bug, so any attack percent you have on your overload gear will not count towards Dorothy's burst damage limit. It is going to be fixed on the next update, so you absolutely want to prioritize attack over anything else. Next up, I recommend that you go for bonus elemental damage because that will just increase her DPS overall. And lastly, you can go for crit rate or crit damage. Just remember that you should avoid increased max ammo capacity at any cost. And for the last part, I want to talk about Litter versus Dorothy. This has been a very hot topic ever since we got Dorothy's kit, and my stance is basically the same as when I did my early analysis on Dorothy. It's less about which character is better, but more of when you should use which character. Yes, Dorothy can deal more damage than Litter, but can the rest of your team afford to not have any protective utility, like the cover HP recovery from Litter? And you also have to consider that when you decide to use Dorothy, you will probably need a healer of some sort, so that's one less DPS unit in your team. So even if Dorothy is giving your team more damage, in return, you are losing DPS by using a healer. So you have to weigh things out depending on the situation that you are in. But if you want a definitive answer from me, from a meta perspective, I would still say that I prefer Litter. But remember that there's no harm in having the two of them, because you will eventually need multiple characters who sort of fill the same role, because the solo raids are coming up. With that being said, that is pretty much everything I have for my Dorothy review/guide. She is definitely one of the best rate up characters as of late, so you definitely won't regret pulling for her. As always, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.